All right, listen to this. Doesn't sound quite right, right? It's time to address that. Let me show you what works for me. Now, I like to begin by cleaning everything with lacquer thinner. And lacquer thinner is kind of harsh, so make sure you have good ventilation and a respirator, right? It's a good idea to unplug your machine. And I just go over the entire surface. You know, a lot of times I'll be doing a glue up and I use the table saw because it's a dead flat surface. And so once in a while you get a drip of glue. And I love using maroon Scotch Brite. This stuff is perfect. It has just the right amount of grit to erase all those stains. And occasionally you'll get a stubborn area, more Scotch Brite, a little bit of elbow grease, and bam, it is gone. I also hit the miter slot tracks, grooves, whatever you want to call them. Now, truthfully, I don't even know why I'm showing this. I've only done this once, the rubbing compound, and it seemed like it worked. I couldn't tell a huge difference after all the steps were completed, but it's definitely something that you could try. I do remember that it made everything look nice and consistent, if that means anything to you. For me, I just want my table saw to be slick and smooth and free of glue. After that, I used some shop rags, shop towels, and my Dynabraid air sander. You could also use a Festool RTS or an electric sander. You know, like a palm sander, the little 4-inch square or whatever they are, yeah? My objective here is to get rid of all the all the residue, right? And here are a few coatings that you could apply after everything's clean. So Waxalit is probably my favorite as far as its longevity. The problem with it is a little challenging to put down unless you have a fresh can. This has been sitting a while. It's probably 2 years old. You can see it's kind of chunky. But what I have discovered is I'll put a little mineral spirits in a can and just break off a chunk. And then with that, maybe, you can kind of smear that around. And if it's still kind of grabby, then a paper towel soaked in lightly in mineral spirits, and then you can really spread that around, right? So then I'll just let that dry a little bit and then go back over it. This works fantastically well. And then between sessions of Waxalit, I like this stuff. Glide Coat used to be called Top Coat, Boss Stitch. This stuff is excellent. I'm not a big fan of wax because I primarily use top coat type finishes like conversion varnish and lacquer, and those aren't compatible with wax. However, if you use like an oil top finish, oil like a penetrating film, a penetrating type finish, not a film finish, like an oil or an oil and wax combination, then wax is fine for your planer beds, table saw, bandsaw, all that. And then the all-important technical test. Yeah, man, like butter. And this will work excellent as well on my outfeed table, which is made of, well, it's Formica. Yeah. All right, so one thing I didn't clarify is the Waxalit is awesome, not only for, creating a smooth, slick surface. It won't stain wood, right? It also won't adversely affect paints or stains, or like I had mentioned, top coat type finishes, lacquer, conversion varnish. It prevents formation of rust, which really for me is not an issue around here, living in the high desert, but I know a lot of you have issues with rust back east or wherever. So yeah, really good stuff. I absolutely love it. And if you ever use it as a glue resist, you can check out a fine woodworking article that Michael Fortune did, and you put it on lightly around your joints. When that glue squeezes out, you can get a chisel and pop it right off. Oh, and real quick, I wanted to clarify something. So a lot of people will use melamine for an outfeed table, and it's okay, but melamine is a low pressure laminate. It's not going to take the wear and scratches like a Formica will or a plastic laminate. Formica is a high pressure laminate and adhered properly to a good substrate. It's going to last forever if you keep it clean and waxed. Makes an amazingly smooth surface and totally worth the effort. That worked exceptionally well. Everything should now glide across effortlessly, yeah? And here I occasionally will glue seams with veneer and get glue on the table, but with that wax lid on there, it just pops right off. Fabulous. Now, I'd have to say on average, I'd probably do this twice a year, but there's really no hard rule here, just whenever it needs it, right? And so what I'll be doing is cleaning the cast iron table like we've done. I'll be checking the wiring. We'll be cleaning the motor. Of course, we'll want to clean and lubricate any moving parts and making any adjustments that are needed, like the fence, for instance. Now's a good time to make sure that it's cutting square, that it's square to the cast iron table. So I'm going to go ahead and get all this sawdust out, use a vacuum, and get as much of this out as I can, and then we'll continue. What are you doing in there? I wonder how fast she'd exit if I hit that switch. So once I had the majority of the sawdust out of the cabinet and the cat, I turned on the dust collector and I turned on my air cleaner, and then now I can just start to blow everything out. The motor, all those, the trunnions and the gears and the sawdust, it just accumulates everywhere. Just blow all that out. So with that dust collector going full blast, it's a very effective way. You can see all that sawdust just flowing out downstream. Fantastic. Of course, this is a good time to blow out the motor, which I will do. My motor's on this side. This is a right tilt. I wish I had a left tilt, but it is what it is. And also, it's a good time to check all your cords, right? Make sure everything looks good. Case in point, see this right here? That has come out of that socket, so I need to address that, get that back in there correctly. You may have noticed this thing, just a cutout here. I've got a magnet on this side. I believe these saws get plenty of air. They don't need all this space, and I get a little bit better dust collection with this in place. And then if I need to tilt, I just move it out of the way. There's a ton of space between the cabinet box and the cast iron table. So in my shop, I have automatic gates on my dust collection. I have 7 of them. Different tools, bandsaw, sander, large table saw, etc. But on this small 10-inch table saw, I just have a manual switch for the dust collection, because a lot of times I'm just cutting maybe one little cut, 2 or 3 inches. I don't need the dust collector to kick on, but the other ones are automatic. So when I hit the switch on the main machine, it opens up the dust gate and fires the dust collector. But on this one, manual switch, you'll hear it in action. The gate will open and then the dust collector will fire on. Check it out. This system is by Greengate, but unfortunately they are no longer in business. They have since retired, but man, I love, love, love this system. Once the switch is off, I have the system set to run 10 more seconds to clear the lines. Okay, we've got the motor blown out. We've got all the sawdust out of the cabinet. I've blown off as much of the gears as I can. And the beauty of this WD-40, and I know before you cringe and think that's the worst thing to use, I've been using it for decades and it is awesome. And here's why. It's a very light oil, so it doesn't build up like a grease. Dry lubricants and silicones and all those, they always make a paste with the sawdust. And I'm going to show you these gears now that I've just blown everything off. I haven't touched anything. I haven't wiped anything. You're going to be surprised how clean they look. Even though it's making this squeak, there's not a lot of caked up gunk on there. Let me show you. You see in there? See that Acme thread there? See that one down there? No caked on crap. It's because I use this. I'll even use it on the trunnion. That gets it in there. I'll use a toothbrush to clean any gunk if there's any, but usually there's not.
Yeah, it's amazing.
With a slight amount of oil on the toothbrush, you can scrub the arbor threads. Now, I have read a lot of articles on this topic, and they all mention the same thing, or they all state the same thing. Don't use an oil because it'll attract dust and cake up. That is simply not true. If the oil is the right oil, if it's light enough, like this WD-40, it works incredibly well. Of course, a product like this will also help inhibit rust and lubricate, which is really the key ingredient in an oil, right? So I spray a little bit on both the front and rear trunnions and then just work that back and forth, raising and lowering the blade, operating the tilt mechanism until everything moves freely.
All right, that went pretty well. Getting oil in here, and on the height mechanism, you're not only getting the gears, the Acme threads, you want to put a little oil back here where there's probably a bushing back in there. Same with the angle adjustment. You can see those threads for the height adjustment in there. So you can get that from in here, but also this has a bushing in here. This is a really good time to take a look at the belts, make sure that they're not, wore out. Change them if you need to. It's always a good idea to change all three at the same time if you have three. Maybe some of them have two. Mine has 3 pulleys. Also, my fence, this is a Unifence. It's probably not as common as the Bismarck style, but I'll get pencil marks, alignment marks on there that I'll just clean off when I'm doing this maintenance schedule. Of course, this is Formica on mine, so I just use lacquer thinner, and that takes off any of those pencil marks. Fabulous. Of course, now would be a good time as well to adjust your stops for, your 0 and 45, although they don't seem to get off once you set them. But everything's working nice and smooth. Feels so much better.
Yeah, I know the shaft isn't bent on that 45 adjustment. It must be the way the wheel is attached to the shaft, but yeah, it's a grizzly.
So I may have mentioned this is the Delta Unifence. They don't make these anymore. I like this. I actually prefer this over the Bismarck for a couple of reasons. Primarily is that this can be loosened like a traditional European saw where the fence can slide back. So if I was to make repetitive cuts, say using a miter gauge, I don't have to put a block of wood clamped to a Bismarck. So that's one key feature that I like. In addition, this guy can lay down like that, lock that in place, and then as you're cutting, let's say angled cuts, it's a little bit safer because you have room for your push stick, your hand, whatever, and you're still using this narrow edge as your fence. Of course, originally this had a nylon guide block, but they tend to wear out and can't get them anymore. Years ago, I made this dude. That's what I call my Unifence roller assembly. Let me get in a little closer. So I just replaced that nylon block with this block of aluminum and a bearing. It's adjustable, and with that, my fence glides ultra smooth. You can hear my fence actually dragging on the table, which is another benefit of the Unifence. So I can just simply loosen these knobs and raise it up a few millimeters or eighth of an inch, whatever. Of course, I have to make a bridge for my miter gauge, which is not a big deal, just a piece of wood with some magnets, and that dude lives right there. Additionally, with the Unifence raised up slightly, I don't get sawdust that accumulates there, and which could, make your cut inaccurate. So, yeah, love the Unifence, a lot of benefits. However, I will say the Bismire is more ideal for creating jigs and fixtures that go over the fence. But pros and cons to everything, yeah. Okay, here's a topic of discussion that, well, there's a lot of opinions. And that is whether you should have your fence opened up slightly by a few thousandths. I guess that makes sense. There might be less binding as a board would go through. However, I want mine parallel. And to begin, when you first set up a table saw, you should absolutely make sure that the blade and these miter slots are exactly parallel. I mean exact. Everything revolves around that setup. Once those are true and perfectly parallel, then you can make the adjustment to your fence and it'll be accurate. Personally, I like mine exactly parallel with the blade, and for one main reason. If I'm using a miter gauge like this and I'm cutting, say, a narrow board, I want the point of contact here to be the same whether I'm over here or even over here. It doesn't make sense to me that it would be tight here, my fence being splayed out a couple of thou, and I end up with a gap over here. That would mean I would have to place this in the exact position every time I make my cut for whatever operation I'm doing. I want mine parallel. It just seems more accurate to me, and I've never had any problems with any binding. But hey, to each their own, yeah.
To be clear, I'm not saying that I would make a cut where I would trap the piece between the blade and the fence. Perhaps a cut would be a groove or a dado.
So if you're ever cutting thin strips of wood, thin this direction, or maybe formica or even commercial veneer, and it's trying to get underneath your table saw, of course, this little fixture is simple to make, right? Just a piece of 1/4 inch, has a cleat. It engages on my particular fence right there, and it's locked in place. Can't move forward or back. And then you can raise your blade, make your cut, and nothing's going to slip under the fence. Sacrificial, they get beat up, make another one in about a minute. All right, let's talk about push sticks for a second. Now, this is what I use. It's just a piece of scrap. I round over 2 opposite corners and make notches on the other two opposite corners. It's ideal, right? 1/4 inch. This one's 1/2 inch. Personally, I don't care for this type of a push stick. That seems almost dangerous if that was to hit the blade, if it was to kick it back towards you. Although I've really never had a problem with one, I just prefer this type for one main reason, and that is I want this part of the push stick to hold the front of my board down as I'm making a cut. And this one can't do that. It can in a sense, but not like one of these. Lots of opinions, whatever works for you. We're gonna make one, and let me just show you how quick and easy they are to make.
Now, anytime you see a video with a tool or a machine, if you don't feel comfortable doing something, simply don't do it. So a number that always sticks with me is 711, which is a standard tread and riser number, and that's about the size of my push blocks, 11 by 7. So you can see it's easy to make one notch and then flip the board around and use a spacer to create a notch on the opposite side. And I just simply knock off the corners where it's a little bit more comfortable in the hand. Quick and easy.
I find it almost comical how so many push sticks are kind of extravagant for what their purpose is. These will get cut up, and really you just need something to keep your fingers safe, right? But with this type of push stick, that'll hold that board down in the front, and my fingers are plenty far enough away. I can ride this right against the fence or sitting on top. And incidentally, if this tail is thicker or longer than the thickness of your material, you should cut it, because if it's like that, that is not ideal, right? Plus it could catch here. So I just slice that, then I can hook it there on this heel, make my cut. But anyway, a couple minutes, right? That's how I make mine. Inserts, for the most part, I like using the factory one because I believe the space around the blade and these holes allow just enough vacuum for that to draw air efficiently. But if I need a zero clearance for whatever reason, I just make mine. Pretty standard thing, right? I like using Baltic birch and Formica on both sides. It makes it extremely rigid, and I can put inserts, threaded Allen key machine screws. And then while I'm doing my table saw maintenance, I can check that. That looks pretty good. Sounds like it's hitting here. Turn that dude around. Yep, that one's a little bit low, but yeah, very efficient, easy, inexpensive, all that.
And that is my down and dirty table saw maintenance. Leave comments if I missed anything. And as always, thank you tons for watching.